I'm Margaret Ryan at the UN Climate Talks in Barcelona, Spain. I'm talking here with Keya Chatterjee. She's the Acting Climate Program Director of the World Wildlife Fund US. Keya, thank you for talking with us.
Thank you for having me.
First question, we heard Connie Hedegaard, the Danish Environment Minister today, challenge the entire conference to come up with clear options so decisions can be made in Copenhagen. Do you think that's really possible at this point?
I do, yeah. We have had a very long text in the last few months. We've narrowed it down in all of the subsequent meetings. This process, this UN Framework Convention on Climate Change process, its goal really is to provide those options and provide that text. And it's moving in that direction in a lot of the less contentious areas. And in the more contentious areas, we just need ministers to know and heads of state, presidents and prime ministers to understand what the options are so that they can make a decision and we can get a deal in the next 34 days.
Okay. Do you think it's likely? We've heard a lot of pessimism about these talks lately.
Well, I think that when you get really close to getting a deal, you start to hear people getting antsy. They're worried about getting blamed, and they're worried about the reputation of their countries. But the reality is that the thing that's going to help the reputation of their countries the most is if they help their publics to understand that this is a really big moment for climate change, and that Copenhagen is a really important climate change moment. We're going to get a deal there, and it's important for countries to start preparing their publics for that.
We heard the EU leaders on Friday, I think, took a big step in saying how much money they think it's going to take to help the less developed countries cope with climate change. First of all, what was your reaction to that statement? And second, what's been the U.S. reaction? Have you heard any?
Well, it's very, very important that that finance is now out there. Under the Framework Convention on Climate Change, there were two things that countries agreed to do. They agreed to take the lead, the developed countries take the lead in reducing their emissions, and they agreed to help. So there are a lot of developing countries that aspire to do a lot in terms of emissions reductions, but they need our support. And so what the EU did is says, this is the amount of support that we think is needed. Now, from the environmental community, we think that actually more is needed even than the EU put forward, but it's really important that something has finally been put forward. And so now it's really important that we see other developed countries start to react in a positive way and really create this race to the top where we get both things going, the leadership and the help.
Have we heard any reaction at all to this from the U.S. negotiating side?
Well, I think publicly we haven't seen a reaction to it, but it's important to note that there actually has been some movement on the U.S. on the issue of finance as well. It's more been around institutions and how you could create a new fund in order to make the climate deal happen, in order to really have a global clean energy economy. You need an institution that's really charged with that rather than just a fragmented set of institutions that we currently have today. So there's been some movement from the U.S. in that area. There's been movement from the EU in terms of the numbers. You're starting to see that you have enough movement in enough areas that you might actually have something come together. In terms of the actual numbers from the U.S., it is tied up in the U.S. Senate right now because we don't yet have a Senate-passed climate bill. Once we do, we'll have a much better sense of what the U.S. has on offer.
Is that bill necessary? I mean, the EPA is saying we're going to go ahead with greenhouse gas regulation, essentially, if they confirm the endangerment finding, which they're expected to do. If the U.S. goes ahead on a regulatory basis, is that enough for the convention here?
Well, I think that it's much better for the convention if we get a U.S. Senate passed bill, but in the next 34 days by the time we have this meeting in Copenhagen. It's very clear that we're not going to get all of the targets and timetables that we need out of EPA regulation. We need the EPA regulation, and it's a really important element of the overall package, but the package comes together in the energy and climate legislation that's been passed by the U.S. House, and it has been introduced in the U.S. Senate.
No matter what happens here, I mean, are there other opportunities between now and Copenhagen? Are there other forums where agreements may be reached, or is this it?
Well, I mean, this year and this last 2 years since there was an agreement in Bali, Indonesia, has been completely unprecedented in terms of the level of attention climate change has gotten at head of state level, and then also at a cabinet level, ministerial level. And so there have been meetings at that very high level almost every day for the last 6 months focused on climate change. That's going to continue in the run-up to Copenhagen. So we have a number of opportunities. There's going to be something called a pre-COP. So just before the Conference of Parties, there'll be this pre-COP meeting and additional sets of meetings where decisions can be made. But this process has to deliver the text. All these meetings are sort of like dominoes. You have to have enough momentum in the previous meeting to get the next meeting to deliver what you need. And we've seen that process slowly coming together in the run-up to Copenhagen, and then, the big domino comes down in Copenhagen.
And you think that this meeting has enough momentum to push its domino forward?
Well, we've got 5 days to find out.
Keya Chatterjee, Acting Director of the Climate Program, World Wildlife Fund US, thank you so much for talking to us today.
Thank you.
I'm Margaret Ryan in Barcelona, Clean Skies News.